In this Module 7, we're going to be talking a little bit more about instruction. You've talked and read about planning. You've looked at your students, the idea of student profiles. We're going to look here at how classroom management and instruction actually go hand in hand, both in terms of how you deliver instruction and in terms of how you manage your classroom, both from an organizational perspective and from a behavioral perspective. Management means you're the boss. However, you notice there's some question marks there. Because to be the boss in the classroom means you're really focusing on building positive teacher-student relationships. Alfie Kohn, who writes extensively about classrooms, classroom management, and students in the 21st century, really talks about building a community of learners. So the idea is that you want to build positive teacher-student relationships from the very beginning. You want to have a mental mindset as to how to manage, how to organize your classrooms. How do you manage whole group instruction versus small group instruction versus individualized instruction? How do you motivate? How do you maintain student attention and involvement? How do we keep student engagement? And how do we improve the classroom climate or reinforce the classroom climate with what we call reinforcers? This is going to be a two-part video. We'll spend the first few parts looking at how to accentuate the positive and how to build a collaborative classroom environment. You want the classroom climate to be positive because that's really how you're going to establish your rapport with your students and develop their responsibility and their sense of cooperation. Students, we have data that says students learn more and are more motivated to learn in classrooms which are orderly and well organized and well structured and where limits are clear. That doesn't mean they have to be overly rigid. In fact, flexibility is key here. But students do best when they know what is expected and how they play a role in that classroom. Your goal as the classroom teacher, as the lead teacher, perhaps in a classroom with several teachers or teachers and paraprofessionals, your goal is try to prevent behavior management issues or misbehaviors from occurring, rather than having to stop the unacceptable behaviors once they do occur. If you can build a system that really looks at that preventive approach, you will have fewer situations in which you're required to intervene to manage misbehaviors. The goal of classroom management is they're very clear. It's to establish a positive classroom climate where learners feel physically and emotionally safe, where people are connected, where students are connected to each other and to you and the other teachers in the room, and where everyone has a sense of their self-worth, a sense of love and respect. It doesn't mean they have a sense of entitlement or that they believe that everything that they want should be accommodated, but it's where they have a mutual sense of respect. And it is a community of learners, a place where it's understood that everyone's going to work together to help everyone learn. Communication is key. Students really do appreciate teachers' willingness to be there for them, to listen, to show support, and to care for and about them. We have a lot of good information from cultural diversity, from special education, which really talks about the ability of a teacher to develop rapport with a student being a very effective component of classroom success. Some of the things we do that show care or caring and support are, we really learn about our students' lives. We learn not just their profiles, which is critical for planning instruction, but we learn a lot about their lives. What are their interests? Where do they come from? What's their community at home like? We want to constantly maintain a positive sense of communicating with the students. So that's what that high ratio of positive to negative comments and statements are. We really always want to take things from the best light, approach things from the best light, and only move to correction or to managing misbehavior when we have to. It is imperative that we learn to listen to students and to be very sensitive to cultural and ethnic differences, linguistic differences, differences in ability, differences in perceptions of ability. This is why we really spend so much time talking about understanding who our students are and what their lives are all about. And we want to, in our academics and in our social interactions in the classrooms, create opportunities for strong personal discussions, connections, interactions among the students, interactions among students who might not typically have an opportunity to interact with each other. The other thing that we have to do is to be, again, always going back to knowing our students' profiles. Consider those characteristics we understand about students and make sure we take steps to connect to the students, to create positive teacher-student interactions. It is particularly critical for our IEP students and our 504 students to know and understand what their needs are, what their strengths are, and to understand any triggers that may occur. What are the typical antecedents of a behavior that's problematic? What usually triggers that kind of behavior? To be aware of that and see what we can do to circumvent that from early on. We talk about this concept of dominance. Bob Marzano talks about dominance. Kawchik in your textbook talked about dominance. The idea of building a positive classroom community has to do with levels of dominance. High dominance is characterized by clarity of purpose and strong guidance, both academically and behaviorally. Now, it's important not to confuse dominance with control. Dominance is not the same as control. It is much more about understanding the goal of what you're doing, what you want your students to do, the direction in which you want your classroom to move, and then having the strategies and methods and techniques to achieve that goal. So again, it's not a rigid kind of lockstep motion where the teacher is dominant or in total control. It's about building a community where it's clear what the expectations are and where how we will meet those expectations is spelled out for and with the students, with input from the students. You express dominance when you establish rules and procedures, and it's best to keep rules to as few as possible and to always state them in the positive. It's also important to establish very clear learning goals. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? It's not unlike the central focus that we talked about in planning. It's very distinctly and directly connected to that. What is it we're going to learn and why is it important that we learn it? And then we also want to have in our toolbox a set of very well-planned, consistent interventions so that when problems do arise, we have a fallback plan or a support plan we can move to quickly. And we always want to be positive in how we assert ourselves. We want to always look at the student as the center. And then our goal is to be assertive enough with that student to help them understand their own learning profiles, their learning needs, and their behavioral needs. So it's a skill that really, these are skills that take time to develop as you move from novice teacher to experienced or master teacher. Besides dominance, and it may seem counterintuitive, but when we look at dominance, we're also looking at the other side of the coin, which is cooperation. And high cooperation, which is a concern for the needs and feelings of others and a desire that everyone function as a member of the community, as opposed to sort of being a lone individual out there. And there will always be students in the class who prefer to operate independently or solely. They do better working on their own. They don't need a big posse or group to belong to. They will have a few good friends, but we want them to feel that they are part of the community. And what we know about cooperation is it develops when we have student buy-in, when we have flexible learning goals that students also contribute to, when we express a personal interest in the students and care enough to learn what they're all about. And when our classroom behaviors, our interactions with the students always begin on a positive note and are equitable. How is it that we're leveling the playing field so everyone gets to participate? One way we also do this to build this cooperation is to look at how we respond when students make errors. It's called error correction. And how do we respond supportively to students' incorrect answers? Always look for the part of the answer you can agree with, and then build your questioning and your scaffolding from that point forward so that the students feel like they've brought something of merit in their responses, and now it's time to work through to a higher level of thinking. According to Robert Marzano, who's looked a lot at what makes classrooms function smoothly and whose guidelines are some of the principles that we use when we look at teacher evaluation. We look at the Danielson model and the Marzano model, often when we're looking at best practices in teacher evaluation. What works best in terms of building a positive classroom community is to have a moderate to high level of dominance paired with a moderate to high level of cooperation. That provides for the best teacher-student relationship for learning, and that tends to be the climate in which classrooms are most successful. We're going to stop here and take a brief pause and move on to our second part of classroom management and its connection with learning.